Welcome to Eat the Bible, the world's fastest chapter-by-chapter Bible study, powered by Revelation 10:10.
Okay, let's get started. Very few people have read the Bible, even though it's the most influential book the world has ever seen. No, it's not an easy read, so I'm going to summarize every chapter quickly, sparing you from reading 1,000 pages. Now, I'm going to be honest. Some chapters are boring. Those chapters will have a sleeping cat down in the corner like this. Speaking of boring, let's get a definition out of the way. Who is God? He's good. He's the creator of all things. He's outside the time zone we find ourselves in, and he is perfect, holy. That means sin cannot be in his presence. So, how do we imperfect, sinful humans connect with God? That's the great mystery the Bible solves. There are 4 threads that weave their way through the Bible. The first thread, and I know this sounds strange to modern ears, God requires a blood sacrifice if we ever hope to interact with him. Put another way, to gain access to God's house, the ID card we show at the door has to be blood-stained. Chapters featuring this principle will be highlighted with a graphic like this. Another thread, Satan, the devil, is real and he is evil. His goal is to destroy us. To do that, he goes after our software, our DNA. In fact, Satan is the best hacker on this planet, and hacking our DNA is Satan's obsession. Chapters where this dynamic is active will feature a graphic like this. Another thread, everything runs according to a script. Because God lives outside our dimension of time, it's as if he climbs inside a time machine and scans your entire life, taking note of all the free will decisions you make between your birth and your death. God then goes back to the beginning of time and he types up his elaborate notes in what's called your book of life. But since I'm a filmmaker, I call it your script. Chapters where the script influence is obvious will show the key verse being typed out on, let's call it, God's laptop. The final thread is really a fundamental question that's posed on every page. What about myself? What do I mean by self? You and I, let's face it, we are selfish and self-centered. It's all about me, right? And our self-centered nature screws up everything we touch, including any relationship we might have with God or with those around us. But the Bible has an amazing solution. We are given the supernatural power to die to ourself on a daily basis. Chapters where self is on display will have this graphic. Okay, to summarize, 4 threads, 4 S's, alphabetical order: sacrifice, Satan, script, self. Now, my Bible studies take Satan seriously. I found 12 common situations the people in the Bible encounter. When this happens, Satan is present. Poor communication, anger, ignorance, porn, drugs, lack of faith, fear, deceit, envy, pride, idolatry, sorcery. Now, all of us make bad decisions from time to time. We get angry, we get fearful, envious, and it's important to realize, just like the people in the Bible we're going to encounter, we are setting ourselves up for satanic attacks. So the question is, how quickly do we recognize it, and what can we do about it? This will teach us. You see, God and Satan are both fighting for your mind. God's army consists of 3 big guns: God as commander, His Son Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Working under them is a myriad of military drones called angels. On the other hand, here's just a partial list of Satan's army. Why so many strange-looking animal-like creatures? Because they strike fear in us. And where fear is, Satan will be. You can see that Satan's army is vast. But I hope and pray you will choose God's side.
8. Genesis.
Let's start with the first book, Genesis, which means in the beginning. Nothing has been created yet. There's only God. And in His hand, He's holding your script. That's how important you are. In the beginning, God creates time, a 24-hour day. 7 of those days are called a week. Day 3, plant DNA is created. Day 4 makes a reference to seasons or appointed times, the first hint of the script. Day 5, animal DNA is created. Day 6, the climax of God's creative action, human DNA with its 23 chromosomes wrapped inside a cell so tiny it's invisible to the naked eye. And yet, that invisible DNA holds 1.5 gigabytes of information. This is a 2 gigabyte thumb drive. How could deaf, dumb, and blind evolution, with its only skill being chance random mutations, how can it compress 1.5 gigabytes of information into an invisible cell? Only a genius engineer can pull that off, and this chapter reveals who that master designer is. We see 2 special trees in a garden. God creates a man, Adam, and a woman, Eve, and places them in this garden in Eden, which is probably modern-day Israel. God forcefully tells Adam not to eat the fruit from the one tree. But tragically, Adam does not communicate this command effectively to Eve. Such poor communication between husband and wife triggers a cosmic alarm. We see Satan, an eloquent and charismatic personality, possessing the body of a serpent. He takes advantage of Eve's ignorance. Satan slips through a portal into her mind and contaminates her thoughts. Suddenly, she thinks it's okay to disobey God. Boom! The world changes. Biological and geological clocks start ticking. Everything starts getting old and dying. And Adam and Eve feel ashamed because they're to blame. God then reads from the script, making a pronouncement concerning the future. He says that his son Jesus, using the name Messiah, will eventually come to earth as 100% God and 100% man. His mission? To deliver us from ourself and the horrible mess we will have created. The script also says God's army will battle Satan's army right up to the bitter end of time. Meanwhile, back at the garden, God shows Adam and Eve how blood from an animal that he sacrifices right there on the spot, probably a lamb, he shows how it covers over and hides their newly acquired imperfection called sin. Eve has 2 kids, Cain and Abel. Cain envies his brother, and his anger opens the door for Satan to mess with his mind. Consequently, Cain murders Abel. Are you starting to see a pattern? Our portal is right here. There's an invisible door providing supernatural access to our mind. The descendants from Adam to Noah are listed, all sharing copies from the original Day 6 DNA. Yeah, that's how it works. Satan commands his fallen angel army, called sons of God, because they were created by God after all. He tells them to go out and rape human women. Those babies grow up to be hybrids called Nephilim, which are half demon and half human. Eventually, almost every human and animal becomes corrupt from Satan's tampering with their DNA. God drowns everything except Noah's family. They happen to be the only ones with uncontaminated DNA. They escape in a huge boat packed with animals whose DNA also has not been tampered with. And by the way, Satan continues these same genetic experiments today. One example is cattle mutilation, where their organs are removed with laser-like surgical precision, and their blood is drained with no signs of struggle. Meanwhile, Satan's army grows exponentially following the flood. That's because, according to the book of Enoch, a book that's quoted in the Bible, it says that when Nephilim drown, their demonic spirits are released. So how many people died during the flood? Estimates range from 4 billion to 10 trillion. So if only 1% of that population were Nephilim, that means 100 billion demons were released upon the earth. Now, today's population stands at 8 billion. That's 12 demons available per human to hassle us and make life miserable. Satan's army is huge, and it's growing by the hour. Without God, we do not stand a chance. Noah's family starts over with the proper bloody animal sacrifice. The sacred nature of blood is highlighted. It is not to be eaten. Noah opens his portal to Satan when he alters his mind with the drug alcohol. His son Ham opens his portal by indulging in pornography when he stares longingly at his naked father, who's passed out in a drunken stupor. Consequently, Ham's descendants become cursed, and some end up residents in Sodom and Gomorrah. The DNA descendants of Noah's 3 sons are listed. Satan stirs up trouble at Babel, the site of the world's tallest building. Pride among the unified population opens up a portal that Satan slips through. And of course, he creates chaos. Various groups start speaking different languages, splitting off to form competing and warring nations. We will learn in the book of Deuteronomy that God assigns spirits over each nation. Psalm 82 says that those territorial spirits have gone rogue and are leading nations astray, even today. God chooses Abram, the man from Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, to be his close friend. Abram pleases God by building altars and sacrificing animals. God tells him that the Messiah is going to come from his DNA. So Satan now focuses his weapons on Abram. God deeds the land of Canaan, later called Israel, to Abram, and he continues proper animal sacrifice in the promised land. Abram gets a preview of Messiah Jesus when he meets a king named Melchizedek. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. God tells Abram that Canaan will belong to his descendants in 400 years. Abram believes God, thereby establishing this thing called faith as the connection between God and man. His good standing with God is based on faith alone, not on good works or following laws. Abram is 85 years old and he's still childless. His wife, Sarai, doesn't believe God can do miracles. Her lack of faith opens a portal that Satan quickly enters. She tells Abram to go impregnate her servant girl Hagar. Out of their disobedience comes Ishmael, who eventually becomes a tool for Satan as an enemy to the Messianic line. Modern-day Islam comes from Ishmael's descendants. God does not punish Abram. Rather, acting in love, God changes Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah by inserting the Hebrew letter He or H in the middle. He, denoting God's Spirit, indicating an inward change of the heart. The outward change is demonstrated by circumcision. This is the first hint of how self is going to be dealt with. Cutting and throwing away of the old, revealing a new self underneath. Meanwhile, Abraham and Sarah are told they'll have a miracle baby next year. Dad will be 100, Mom 90. God shows up on earth as a man. Abraham argues with him over how many godly people it will take to make the corrupt city of Sodom acceptable in God's eyes? The answer? 10. Abraham knows there's basically only one good guy in town, his nephew Lot. God dispatches 2 angels to rescue Lot's family before destroying Sodom by fire. That's because the residents' DNA have been corrupted by Satan. Abraham becomes fabulously rich in the year leading up to Isaac's birth. Isaac is born. In God's eyes, Isaac is Abraham's only son. 33 years later, God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on an altar. This is the ultimate test of his faith. Just before he's about to slice Isaac's carotid artery with a knife, God stops him. This turns out to be a preview, a prophetic pattern of what's going to happen 1900 years later with God's only son, Jesus. However, unlike Jesus, who was fully informed of his mission, Abraham's poor communication with Isaac creates a portal Satan passes through. The result is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Isaac ends up relating to God as a trauma victim, and God becomes the fear of Isaac. Sarah dies. A wife is found for Isaac from amongst his relatives back in Mesopotamia. Isaac's wife Rebekah has twins, Esau and Jacob. God strengthens Isaac's faith by talking to him in person. But his PTSD is on display, and God has to calm him down by saying, "Fear not." Jacob tricks his father into blessing him rather than his older brother Esau. In doing so, God chooses Jacob as the DNA stream Jesus will issue from. Deception is Satan's favorite portal of entry, and in this tragic situation, Esau's anger over being deceived consumes him. Satan gains easy access to his mind. His descendants become sworn enemies of Israel to this day in the Middle East. God reveals himself to Jacob by appearing in a dream. Jacob gets a taste of his own medicine when he's tricked by his father-in-law Laban into marrying not one, but 2 women, the sisters Leah and Rachel. Envy between the 2 girls gives Satan access. Quadruple the chaos, not only from 2 wives, but each of their servant ladies. Jacob impregnates all 4, resulting in 11 sons and 1 daughter. After 20 years of servitude, Jacob finally breaks away from his dishonest father-in-law. Jacob returns home to his roots in Canaan. He wrestles all night long with God. The conniving, manipulative Jacob is called out for who he is. Then God gives him a new identity and a new name, Israel, which means he struggles with God or he prevails with God. Jacob's inner battle of the old versus the new man is a preview of how the self will be dealt with at the cross. Jacob builds an altar. Satan uses the rape of Jacob's daughter Dinah by a foreigner to infiltrate his brothers' minds. Anger swings the portal wide open. Strife develops between the family and their Canaanite neighbors. Jacob, that is Israel, builds another altar after God appears to him again. His 12th and last son, Benjamin, is born. The so-called 12 tribes of Israel are now in place. Esau's DNA lineage is listed. Jacob's favorite son, Joseph, is envied by his older brothers. Satan enters into the brothers' minds via the anger and envy portals. Consequently, Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, and he's taken in chains to Egypt. Jacob's son Judah has sex with his daughter-in-law Tamar. From this union come twins. Illicit sex is a portal Satan often uses to drill deep into one's mind, but God always trumps Satan. And the twin named Perez will end up being part of the Messianic line. Now, using Bible code technology on the original Hebrew of this chapter at 49 letter intervals, we see the Messianic line from Rahab to David spelled out in chronological order 700 years in advance. Another great example of the script. Joseph's situation goes from bad to worse, from being a slave to being falsely accused of rape. He's thrown into prison, but God blesses him greatly in his misery. God gives Joseph prophetic powers. Joseph's ability to interpret dreams and his wisdom so impresses the Egyptian leader that he becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man literally overnight. Back in Canaan, Joseph's dysfunctional family is suffering from a famine. They travel to Egypt in search of food and end up begging for mercy from the brother they sold into slavery 13 years earlier. They don't recognize Joseph, but he knows who they are. Joseph plays with their minds, making them wallow in their guilt. Joseph plays more mind games with them. Joseph finally reveals his true identity. A tearful reunion ensues. He tells his brothers about the script, saying, "You didn't send me here, God did." 70 of Jacob's extended family come to Egypt to escape the 7-year famine. Because of Joseph's wisdom, Egypt has prepared for the worst. Jacob's family resume their career as shepherds in Egypt. Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are adopted by Jacob, creating a baker's dozen. Jacob prophesies over his 12 sons, and then he dies. 5 decades later, Joseph dies, but not before having to remind his guilt-ridden brothers once again about the script. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good."